This is the Ifi idsd Nano Black Label. So this is a DAC amp combo, and you can use it as a DAC standalone as well. And so if you want to pair it with a different amp, like for example, if I wanted to plug my Magni 2 into this, I could do that with the, basically it's a 3.5 to RCA plug, and that just goes right into the back with the line out. Line out. So you can do that if you want to. But I've found that actually this sounds at least as good as the shit stack. I don't really see a reason to buy the shit stack when you can get this for around the same price. And this is also portable. It does more file formats. This does DSD, DXD, and MQA. And the DAC itself, I feel, is a better DAC. It's as good or better. That's how I'd put it. Now, I should mention that this is not the MIMBI. This is not the multi-bit version. And also, this is the Magni 2, not the Magni 3. So if we're doing like an apples-to-apples comparison of like what's out right now, I feel like it's not quite fair because you're talking about two totally different things. However, if you already have a Modi 2 Magni 2 stack and you like the way that sounds and it pairs well with what you got and you want something that's portable, this is the way to go. Now I will say that the sound of this, it's a little bit more open, a little bit more, so the blind spots that exist with the shit stack aren't there with this, with the i5. And those blind spots being, you notice it with headphones like the Night Owl and some of the other headphones that do really well on they're very revealing of the amp that you use, like the HD 800 and even like the HD 600 and 650s. The blind spots for the shit stack end up being just left and right of center. It does the staging well. You get sort of the wide representation, but as you kind of do like that 180 degrees, there's two spots that end up with nothing there, or with, it's very minimal there. With the Ifi, it fills that in, so you get a much more complete picture, similarly to the way that higher end amps will do it as well. So for example, if you go to a tube amp, or if you go to a hybrid amp or something like that from the shit stack, it also fills that in. It's an immediate comparison that you notice. So people talk about it being bigger, wider, and more open. Well, that's typically what that is it's filling in those blind spots that are otherwise there. This, if I'm gonna compare to other DACs as well, on the portable side of things, the FIO variants also have a similar blind spot. And I'm actually not sure if that's because of the amp section or because of the DACs that they're using. But this one, it doesn't have those same issues. And so you end up with an experience that's a lot closer to what a full-size desktop amp experience would be. And even more so than the traditional shit stack. So let's talk a little bit about the, I'm not going to go over everything because you can look those specs up online and accessories and whatnot. It comes with everything you need. That's not too important in my mind. The outputs. Let's talk about this because this is actually one of the negative points. Actually, the direct output that it has is just fine for all of my headphones. So the Night Owl, we got the Aeon Flow Open, and it actually powers the Aeon Flow Open easily. Like I had no problems. I mean, maybe if you're, having multiple different sources playing at the same time and you're changing volumes and stuff like that, and you want to turn the whole thing up, then maybe you need a little bit more power and you need to go up to the micro or something like that. But for the most part, if you're just playing like music on its own, this was plenty of power. Not quite as much as the Magni 2. This has more power, but this was enough. And also, most of the other headphones these days that are coming out, I can't think of a single headphone in the last 2 years, maybe more, that's been a notable, worthwhile headphone to get that has ridiculous impedance requirement. This obviously this would not power the HE6, might not even power the HE500, but you needed substantial amping to get those going. And ever since, that era, headphones have been getting better and better and more efficient. And so I feel like, you know, you don't need as much power anymore. It's more important to focus on the other things. You know, how does it sound? What's the DAC like? That kind of stuff. Power isn't the determining factor anymore. But with that said, the power from the direct output is just fine. What isn't just fine is when you plug in some really sensitive IEMs, like the Campfire Andromeda. You end up with a little bit of hiss in the background. Now it's really like just minor, but that hiss. So if you have tracks that are playing like piano tracks or something like that, where there might be a little bit more space between the notes, you'll hear it there. However, there's also typically in recordings that do have instruments, there's typically a tone of just the fact that that it's a recording playing, that, you know, the microphones were turned on, right? That where that tone is even more audible than what the hiss would be coming from this. It's only when you have gaps in between, like major gaps in between when things are playing, that you would notice the hiss, and even then it's minor. However, it's there with sensitive with IEMs essentially. So they've included this IEM port, or the IE match port. Which it does exactly that. It attenuates the signal and gives you, it removes all the hiss, and it's a very, people talk about black background. Well, that's black background. It really it removes any of that extra sound. However, the problem with this port is that this is a 4 ohm, roughly. Don't quote me on any of this stuff. You can look up the specs online, but it's around 4 or 5 ohms output impedance. And that means that really sensitive IEMs like the Campfire Andromeda will, it'll change the frequency response to the point where it does not sound either the way that it's supposed to. And it just, in my opinion, it just sounds bad. Like, it's still got all the resolution, detail, and clarity that the Andromeda has. It's just, it's not as full sounding, it's not as rich sounding as it would if it was perfectly matched with its either 1 ohm or less impedance, output impedance pairing, and which the standard output with direct output actually is. It is around 1 ohms. So I personally have absolutely no use for this IE match port, and I find that the Andromeda sounds way better on the direct port, and I'd rather use that. You might find that, you know, if you have IEMs that aren't quite as sensitive, you might find that the IE match port is just fine. But for me, I have no use for that. It's useless. And you know, the crazy thing about this is, I don't understand why they made that 4 ohms output impedance. It's not like they weren't able to make it less or have it be variable. Ifi has also come out with this dongle, the IE match. And I won't do a separate review on this, so I'll talk about it here. But the IE match is essentially the same kind of thing. It's an attenuator for IEMs, so you can use them on other sources that have higher output impedance or have some sort of a burble or a hiss in the background. And this does a great job at getting rid of that. However, if you look really closely here, I don't know if you can see this, but there are 2 settings here. You got high and then you got ultra. The high setting is between 2 and 3, so 2 and 2.5 ohm output impedance, and then the ultra setting is less than 1 ohm impedance. So if you have really high sensitivity IEMs like the Andromedas, you would go with the ultra setting. Now, of course, that also reduces the volume by about 24 dB or something like that. It reduces the volume significantly to the point where it's just not loud enough on my smartphone, for example, which is a real problem. So I have to kick it up to high when I'm using that. Now, when you do use high, it does again change the frequency response, which is not ideal. So this is a bit of an issue. So, but what I don't understand is, why didn't they just use the same kind of thing that they're putting in the dongle into the Nano? You know, we got 4 ohms output impedance versus less than 1. I mean, clearly this is better, right? Now, I'm sure there's a reason why they did it. These guys are brilliant who are putting this stuff together, so I'm not going to question their reasoning. Maybe there's, a whole bunch more IEMs out there that would do better with a 4 ohms output impedance. However, it's not the Andromedas. I can tell you that much. But yeah, so I don't know why they didn't just use this kind of technology, because as it is right now, I end up having to run the dongle with the DAC in the standard direct port for the Andromedas, right? Everything else is fine on the direct port, but to get rid of the hiss, you got to use this. Now, there's still a tiny bit of an audible frequency response change when you do use even the ultra setting and the direct port, but it's so minor that I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, I wish that I didn't have to do this, because not only is it changing the frequency response slightly, but I also have to use a dongle. But it's not something where I would take marks off of this for that. I mean, the only thing I would sort of take marks off is the fact that the IE match port is 4 ohms output impedance, right? That could have been different. Then there's also Dac Filters. I don't get into that stuff. That to me doesn't sound any different. And people talk about the measure versus listen. They talk about measure being a little bit more grainy or harsher, sparklier, but to me it doesn't. I don't notice anything with that. The overall sound, I think, like if you are looking to buy a DAC/DAC amp and you're looking at your usual suspects of, the shit stack, or you're looking at even a Dragonfly Red, right? I mean, that's around the same price. I don't see why you would get that when you could get this, right? I mean, there's no reason for this to exist, because of this, right? This is battery powered as well, right? You can, if you want to be portable, you can. So I don't see any point of the traditional desktop stacks, unless they're high end, right? Because this exists, right? You can hook this up to just as many things as you can hook a Modi up to. So keep that in mind. Like, if you're going to be spending $200 on a DAC amp, either discretely, like separately, or together, I don't know why you would get anything other than this, unless you had very specific requirements, like the output impedance of less than 1 ohms, if that's what you need. In which case you should maybe look at going up to the big brother, the micro, which gets quite a bit more expensive. You're talking like twice as much, right? But for anybody who doesn't have that kind of niche requirement, I think this is just fine. Anyways, that's going to end the review. I'll probably do a separate review on the Andromeda. I won't talk about this. I might end up actually picking up the bigger brother, the micro, just for that exact reason. I kind of need to have something that doesn't have higher output impedance, but we'll play with that and see how it goes. Yeah, thanks for watching.